Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in the world, according to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you. Always glad to be here.
You're welcome. So, big topic of the day: US Iran ceasefire. Is there a ceasefire? Is there not a ceasefire? Because there is a lot of firing happening between the two sides. Where are we on that? We thought there was a list of exchange of lists, which could lead to, end of this whole thing that had happened 2 to 3 months back. Where are we on this, Irina?
Well, this is not the first time a ceasefire turns out to be anything but. We're seeing the same thing in Lebanon, and we've seen also Ukraine and Russia, where there were supposedly ceasefires during various holidays that were almost immediately violated. Gaza too. We've had multiple ceasefires in Gaza where fighting resumed at various points in time, or at least occasional strikes on specific Hamas figures and so forth. Interestingly enough, Trump still treats these ceasefires as such, probably because he does not want to face the need to make a major decision if he admits that the ceasefire was violated. He also doesn't want to interrupt the talks. So I think a more accurate way of describing the current situation is that the negotiations are ongoing, even as some intermittent fighting continues. Whether or not it's really a full ceasefire, that raises a lot of questions, I would say. Interestingly enough, according to Trump, the sides are closer than ever, despite the ensuing violence, to some sort of an agreement. Trump wants greater concessions on the nuclear issue. What those concessions specifically are is not clear, because as of last week, Trump claimed that Iran was willing to transfer the enriched uranium out of the country, but Iran wanted that uranium to go to China or to Russia. Trump wanted it to go directly to the United States. Whether it's actually going anywhere remains a big question, because the enforcement of this process is also questionable. In the meantime, Iran attacked Kuwait and Bahrain. There were multiple such attacks, and there was the last attack on Kuwait ended up killing a person and wounded numerous others. U.S. retaliated at various points in time, but never. And the blockade, of course, persists. But according to Rubio, the biggest priority for the administration right now is actually the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. According to the Trump administration, the blockade has been effective in keeping Iran from exporting oil at this time. But whether or not there's a conclusion to these discussions remains questioned. As long as Trump treats the situation as a legitimate ceasefire, he can claim that he is actually not losing this current situation, and that the high gas prices at the pump are not all for nothing. In theory, this could continue indefinitely, or at least until November elections, after which Trump can claim that he has no more congressional support for this process and will have to withdraw for lack of funding from the House, presumably. We'll see if he will get that far. For now, the process seems to have entered a very familiar pattern. Trump claims that the two sides are close to coming to some sort of an interim agreement that would continue into a more serious phase of negotiations over substantive issues. But every time he makes that claim, Iran attacks. Some interpret it as Iran not wanting to lose face domestically, and that the attacks are largely symbolic. Others claim that they do not want Trump to be claiming any concessions at all, and they would rather sabotage the process than let him win on any point. If that is the case, then we are actually not any closer to an agreement than we were weeks ago.
Absolutely, Irina. Let me understand it this way for the audience. What is the problem? Where is the problem? Or is it about who is the problem? How do you want to help us understand that?
Well, the problem is the regime. The regime is not going to change. It's not going to change its stripes simply because Trump said so. The regime has no intention of giving up its nuclear program, its ballistic program, or its proxies. I have no question in mind that this entire time it has been rebuilding military capacity, and that's not a mystery. It's open source information from various intelligence agencies. It has rebuilt extremely quickly. The question is how, given the blockade on the import of materials and so forth. But as I said, also the blockade has not been perfect. Even if the oil tankers have not gone through, other types of ships have. The other issue, of course, is Trump is likewise a problem. He does not. He believes that if he talks enough to Iran, Iran will eventually, under pressure, succumb and choose a more rational way to deal with the dilemma of U.S. blockade and economic pressure. But Iran is willing to squeeze its own population as much as needed. And it also understands that US cannot continue the blockade indefinitely. So in Iran's mind, it's actually just a matter of waiting it out a few months, not even 2 years of the remnants of Trump's tenure. Whether or not it can actually tolerate the 2 months before its economy collapses completely is a big question, but it's certainly willing to take the chance. And it is entirely possible that the regime is so fanatical that it would rather collapse internally than admit even a minor concession on any point. In some ways, US is just as trapped by this process as Iran, because it has to deal with its own economic situations, with the grumbling from its allies, and with the need to maintain assets day and night in the Middle East, even as conflicts in other regions are proliferating, and 20,000 people are actually stuck in the Strait of Hormuz for months now.
Absolutely, Irina. So, whatever the situation is between Iran and the US, but the thing is, oil prices seem to be just following their lead. Any tough talk impacts oil prices. Any soft talk that also impacts oil prices. Looks like, almost a calibrated sort of a game going on, and looks like some people might be benefiting, but the whole world is reeling, especially in this part of the world. People are reeling under those prices, as well as, the impact of all this warfare that is there. Warfare or ceasefire, whatever we want to call it.
Indeed, from Trump's perspective, he made it very clear that he doesn't care even about Americans and the economic impact on them. But of course, other parts of the world are probably even less of a priority than his own constituents. India is actually one of the leading economies exposed to disruptions in Gulf energy supplies. When the energy price rise, that increases inflationary pressure. It complicates economic planning. Some exports had to be actually relinquished because of that. New Delhi has spent years diversifying energy imports and trying to provide greater resilience than during previous regional crises. So it is tolerating the current situation better than expected, though it's still very difficult. Its tech sector is less vulnerable than its manufacturing and transportation sectors. So the energy shocks have not completely destroyed everything. There is also a strategic petroleum reserve, which provides some protection against short-term disruptions. But the longer the situation continues, the more of a risk that these strategic reserves run out remains. Also, India maintains a variety of strong economic relationships with Gulf states. So, despite the regional tensions, the energy cooperation among them continues. And for now, the long-term growth trajectory still remains intact. But again, prolonged instability in Hormuz increases economic obstacles and investment uncertainty. And at the end, it's less about shocks themselves than about the expectation of a higher risk environment. And that is what the investments are more concerned about: long-term instability, prospects not wanting to invest in areas where the future is unclear. And that this is what India is facing now. Of course, in the earlier stages of the war, we've seen some riots over energy prices. Every time Trump is trying to calibrate the energy expectations by essentially making claims that U.S. is close to finishing up the diplomatic talks successfully. That gives everyone a break, people calm down, but then it returns to the status quo, which is why I'm very skeptical that negotiations are actually any closer than they've been earlier. Nothing has changed fundamentally from Iran's perspective. And as long as Iran's perspective remains unchanged, there's no reason to believe that anything is all that different. Of course, eventually Iran may simply decide that it's gotten what it wanted, that U.S. has significantly, its influence is reduced around the world significantly enough to this due to this crisis, that it can just sign off on some fig leaf agreement and then continue as it would. I don't think Iran believes US will have the appetite for very stringent enforcement, and they probably think that the situation is going to be similar to what happened after JCPOA. They will continue quietly, and they may even get sanctions relief at some point.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when do you think, things will be back to normal? Does it look like, because some of the issues are very contentious and nobody would want to, budge on them. Whereas at the same time, the midterm elections polls are approaching for President Trump. And I think from both the home front as well as the external fronts, things are getting a bit tight for him.
Well, in terms of returning to normal, I hate to say it, but even if the conclusion is indeed imminent, even if the deal is signed today, the gas prices will not be back to normal for a while. After a major economic shock, it takes time to recover. And here there is actually a logistical reason for that, not simply an issue of perceived risk, being that many ships are stuck with the supplies and it will take them a while to get back to where they need to be and for trade to resume. Remember that this entire time, the ships are not sailing through that region. Some ships have gone through other routes, but in some cases, there's been a negligible trade. In the case of Kuwait, in the month of April, it has not been able to export anything at all. So that's one major supplier completely offline. I don't expect a quick economic resolution to this situation. Concerning diplomatic resolutions, because Trump said he does not care about the economic impact, one can only presume that his concerns are far less about the midterms than about maintaining influence within the party itself. He has to placate the Iran hawks who do not believe he should go for quick concessions that do not result in substantive changes to the current situation and do not constrain Iran sufficiently. What that means in practice is unclear at this point because I do not see any new mechanisms for leverage that US has aside from the current blockade. It can continue bombing things, but Iran rebuilds them almost immediately, and US so far has not shown willingness to go much further than that in terms of deploying ground troops, for instance. I think to some extent Trump expects that the Republicans will lose at least the House. Nevertheless, also some of the campaigns among the Democrats, the primaries are indicating that there may not be a very clear strategy for success in the Senate. So as long as Trump keeps the Senate, he is not all that concerned because his biggest concern is less about finishing the war successfully or achieving any major breakthroughs in his last 2 years than about not being removed from office, which requires both houses of Congress to be dominated by the party opposed to him. If he is merely impeached again, nothing will change and he will just continue as it was, albeit with less financial support for his initiatives.
Absolutely, absolutely. Be that as it may, let's talk about India. A lot of things are happening. India is the place to be right now, it seems like. Marco Rubio was here very recently, and now, right now, Venezuela interim leader Delcy Rodriguez, he's in India for a 5-day visit. Help us understand, how do you see this visit? Was it planned or it comes all of a sudden? What's happening there? Where does India fit into her visit? How does India benefit? How does Venezuela benefit from this?
Well, in terms of Venezuela, I wouldn't say that it's a complete surprise. India is a major and growing power. It's a major source of critical minerals, becoming a leading tech industry power. It's becoming a hot market commodity, even with the economic crisis that has curtailed a lot of the logistical plans that Europe, the Middle East, and India had in the works. Even with all that, there is still a huge benefit to being engaged. For Venezuela, there is a need to diversify its alliances now that the sanctions on oil have been lifted. From India's perspective, it's advantageous because it could solve some of the energy problems. A source of cheaper oil that is basically approved by the United States is something quite desirable at the moment, and this economic factor is probably the biggest point that's bringing the two sides together at this moment. Everything else in Venezuela remains unclear. The human rights situation is essentially unchanged. Some of the Maduro loyalists are being extradited to the US or purged, but the regime itself is fairly intact, and politically Venezuela is not very far from where it was. What has changed, again, is the access to the energy resources which India badly needs, and Venezuela needs trading partners to recover its economy from years of sanctions and more recent economic pressure by the United States. So I wouldn't say that this visit is transformative of the relationship. I doubt that politically anything will change drastically or that the two countries will find some newfound close friendship. But I do think that some economic arrangements are going to be discussed and possibly implemented in the near future.
Absolutely. Is it a new sort of an outreach by the US administration to, assuage ruffled feathers in New Delhi? Marco Rubio was here. They know that India has its own way of looking at the world. It has its own relationship with other countries, and tariffs and all those things have impacted that relationship. And Venezuela visit is perhaps one way of trying to compensate some respite for New Delhi. How would you look at that? Or is it a visit on its own entirely?
I wouldn't say it's disconnected. Certainly, there had to be some sort of U.S. approval, but again, U.S. acted earlier to lift the sanctions, so there is also an expectation, whether with India or with anybody else, that this is exactly what we would see happening. Venezuela reaching out to potential major customers for oils. The timing is probably not completely coincidental. First of all, there is the energy crisis going on, and there is a need for relief. I think it would have happened even without the US as an equation, simply as a matter of pragmatic need. Do I think that US is trying to present it as a concession or as some sort of a goodwill gesture or encouraged the timing? Possibly. Still, again, I think that Venezuela has enough interest in this matter that it probably would have proceeded sooner rather than later because of the opportunity and because of the need. And likewise, India is looking for ways to counteract the crisis and to diversify its supply and to get sources of oil that are not at risk of being held back or blown up along the way. Still, it's very clear that Rubio's visit for sure was connected to the efforts to smooth over the relations. India remains a major priority for the United States. US is also trying to prevent diplomatic vacuums that competitors could exploit. The Indo-Pacific strategy, at least in theory, remains likewise a top priority. Less about, strictly speaking, any sort of military confrontation with China than about technology exchanges, broader defense coordination, and supply chain cooperation. And the supply chain is especially a key issue. India is now the source of major logistical hubs and supply chain hubs, both due to its geography, due to its technological role, due to its growing and diversifying relationships with other countries. And US understands that there are only so many options, and you can't keep fighting with everybody. You need to have some sort of a economic stability to function in terms of its own trade. 100% tariff on 100% goods is just not possible, especially after the recent court decisions in the United States. It has to normalize relations. It has to ensure that the supply chains are active. More broadly, these visits are showing that the US is paying attention to regional middle powers and not simply dealing only with the military crisis at stake. At the end of the day, these powers are also important and growing actors. And if you abandon these relationships while focusing on temporary issues, there will be nothing to go back to when the situation normalizes. So you simply cannot afford to ignore India. That's basically the bottom line here.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. But for a president who says he really doesn't care about a lot of other things, caring about India relationship, sending your Secretary of State for several days visit in this sweltering heat at the Taj Mahal, at other places, did they get what they wanted to? Or is it Marco Rubio perhaps thought that it is a good way to look at the future? Maybe someday I will come to this part of the world as president, perhaps. This will be good understanding of the country.
Well, we have heard a lot of discussions about, especially economic discussions on various industry-related issues, which is not a bad thing. There hasn't been huge breakthroughs in terms of major deals being announced or anything else. There was also not a big controversy. I don't think anyone came away particularly upset, at least not any more than prior to that. I think Rubio can be a skilled diplomat when he has the authority to do so. I think in this case there weren't any particular red lines for him to watch out for. I think the issue was more about managing the situation, ensuring continuity, trying to find room for additional trade prospects and essentially figuring out where things stand. This visit was probably as much about listening as about talking, trying to figure out just how upset India is with the US and what can be done in the meantime. But no huge changes came out of this visit. For Rubio, this was an opportunity, a face-saving opportunity after, I would say, a fairly disastrous visit to China.
China.
Many people perceive the visit as simply being ineffectual, but I would say it's a lot, from Chinese perspective, at least, it's a lot worse than that, and that is what counts now. Perhaps other parts of the world not paying attention to details, but after being essentially called an idiot upon visit to a major U.S. Trading counterpart and economic competitor, I think Rubio was eager to put that behind him and to achieve something independently of Trump. The fact that Rubio was independently on the strip, that Trump wasn't there, I think it gave him room to at least restore some level of credibility and to show that he is capable of managing relationships when he's not curtailed by external circumstances. Certainly, it was not a negligible moment for him. It was something positive. Would I call it a major accomplishment? Perhaps not. It was a maintenance visit, not a groundbreaking, trailblazing initiative. But at the very least, it positioned him as someone who's regularly involved in relatively positive things and not just in scandals and questionable engagements.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's move on from India to the Shangri-La Dialogue. Again, this time, China was not there. What happened? What did not happen? Any key takeaways that matters to us, our audience?
Well, from China's perspective, it definitely was a message to the international community. Simply put, China does not wish to provide high-level representation to summits and gatherings it perceives to be associated with Western efforts to influence the region. And all of that is fairly expected given the great power competition context. And China's message is also to underscore that that competition is very much happening rather than this is a simple normal engagement. It seeks to exacerbate this polarization and to force the other countries in the Asia Pacific in Asia to choose, even if they do not necessarily want to choose, as has been made clear at various points. Many of the countries view the situation as pragmatic. They have serious trading relationships with China, even if there are also territorial tensions and disputes. Nobody wants a major war or standoff that would impact their security and economies. Nevertheless, they're trying to manage and navigate the situation as much as possible. From the U.S. perspective, Washington emphasized maintaining a favorable balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. Hexeth comments caught attention regarding Ukraine and U.S. repositioning its production to be able to provide Ukraine with aid and to sell badly needed weapons such as Patriots for defensive purposes more quickly. Nevertheless, his rhetoric is, I would say, while seemingly positive compared to past remarks and seemingly indicating at least a more pragmatic U.S. stand on the Russia-Ukraine issue, do not necessarily line up with the logistical reality of production. We have not seen any substantive increase either before, during, or after this visit. So these comments were probably meant to placate the international community about U.S. capacity and far less about really changing anything for Ukraine. Of course, the US highlighted alliance networks as the foundation of regional stability. There was a lot of discussion about the concerns for China's military modernization, coercive activities. All of these things remain central themes. US was there to reassure partners that the Indo-Pacific remains a strategic priority despite crisis elsewhere, which has been the concern for everybody attending. US has had to move some of the assets to the Middle East in recent months due to the tensions there. There's concern about how China could use that situation to put greater pressure nearby on regional powers. And there's also a broader concern whether the Indo-Pacific remains a strategic priority to the US among both due to the proliferating Middle Eastern crisis, but also due to the US shift to land-based Central Asian corridors, economic corridors that may have diverted attention from the maritime trade in the Indo-Pacific. As far as India is concerned, it seeks to expand its role from merely being a very significant economic player in the region to being seen as a leading security provider in the Indian Ocean and its vicinity. The emphasis from India's perspective was, as always, strategic autonomy, but it is also expanding defense cooperation with multiple partners, maritime security, supply chain resilience, and critical tech cooperation were part of the major attention from that angle. And of course, India also strives to continue to be a bridge between Western partners and developing Asian nations. So from that perspective, it's kind of expanding its profile. It's looking to rise. And from the perspective of other Asian countries, there's a growing willingness to discuss security concerns much more openly than in previous years. Maritime disputes, military modernization, cybersecurity, and economic security were all themes, more broadly speaking, both as linked to the great power competition and also independently. Southeast Asian states are increasingly seeing economic prosperity and security as being inseparable due to this aforementioned economic corridors, some of them passing through from Central Asia into Southeast Asia and others internal. Many of the players there were seeking stronger deterrence capabilities, but they don't also necessarily want to align with the rigid bloc politics. So strategic autonomy is not just an issue for India, it's also actually more of a position for many of the Shangri-La attendees. And we are also seeing the trend of defense spending continuing to rise across much of Asia, not only due to the great power competition, but due to other regional disputes. Security cooperation among middle powers is also becoming more important. And overall, the dialogue reinforced the perceptions that Asia is now one of the primary, if not the primary theater, shaping 21st century strategic competition.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is why I wonder, wouldn't it be pragmatic for China to attend such conferences, especially in the backdrop of, Japan's growing reach, defense with Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan, growing by leaps and bounds. So, what does this all mean? Means where does Japan want to go with that, and what does it mean to China in that sense?
Well, indeed, China should have probably at least been there symbolically to see what is happening and to position itself as indispensable in this regional realignment. But first of all, she is a very ideological player, and I cannot emphasize that enough. He is extremely devoted uh, to a view that China should be the single superpower in the world, and essentially by not even acknowledging this grouping with the US present, he is very much trying to send a signal that anything that does not involve China's organizing principle behind it is irrelevant and not worthy of China's approval or of presence and so forth. Japan, however, is trying to pick up where China is leaving off. It's becoming one of the Indo-Pacific's most important security actors. It is increasing spending substantially, with the full approval now of its parliament. The defense cooperation with the Philippines is very much reflecting shared concerns regarding maritime security and regional deterrence against China being the top priority for Japan. It has managed to maintain dialogue with Russia despite territorial disputes, and even with Iran despite the current crisis. Some would argue that Japan has become an intelligence hub and a diplomatic hub where controversial issues are being discussed, and some would posit that Japan, rather than Pakistan, is the real negotiator in the US-Iran conundrum, and Pakistan, as I've previously mentioned, is more of a public face and messaging liaison rather than a true negotiator capable of providing a neutral grounding for talks. Japan, on the other hand, has a history of very highly skilled diplomatic engagement with various adversarial states without being a major target for any of them. As a result, it has earned that reputation, and it has done so much more quietly than others who have attempted to be seen as multilateral mediators like Oman and Qatar, whose engagements have been fraught with controversy. For Japan, that has been decidedly not the case. But even as its diplomatic roles continue to hold steady, Japan is also being seen as a major security power. In addition to the Philippines, it's also strengthening its cooperation with South Korea. Despite the historical tensions, there's a lot of pragmatism in both countries, and where there are still obstacles to a full strategic engagement, but a lot of it is on its way to being either resolved or at least managed sufficiently to address the current threat environment. Informal security coordination involving Taiwan has expanded significantly as concerns regarding regional instabilities are growing with China's recent encirclement of Taiwan. A lot of this encirclement is probably more about messaging and strategic communication rather than about preparation for an imminent attack, but still it makes everyone very uneasy. And Japan, by the way, has had a historically strong relationship with Taiwan. At one point, Imperial Japan was the dominating party. China was not always in charge in Taiwan. Netherlands, Japan, and others have had their hand there as well. So for China to claim a 3,000-year continuity with no interruption is simply false. It's historically fallacious narrative that no one should believe simply by reason of basic historical realities. And also, Tokyo's position on regional security is changing, evolving to be seen as more as interconnected rather than confined to simply a narrow territorial defense of its own lands. Defense industrial cooperation, by that token, is also becoming a major component of its regional influence, and all of this is signaling that Japan is transitioning from a primarily defensive posture, as has been the case since World War II, due to the requirements of its own constitutions and the culture it has maintained internally, towards a much more proactive regional security role. And there's a growing popular acceptance of that, as well as we have seen based on the parliamentary election results.
Absolutely, absolutely. Moving from Japan, let's move on to the Gaza Board of Peace. And so, hell, this is the last topic of the day. The Board of Peace is said to be bankrupt as officials prepare to visit Gaza. I almost forgot about this. I guess even the world forgot about this. And now you are saying before it came into proper existence, it's bankrupt. What bankruptcy? Was there even some money with it, or in that sense? Help us understand what's happening with the Gaza Board of Peace.
So 17 billion was pledged by the various actors who wanted to join the board. Apparently, Trump has modified his position to claim that these contributions are for permanent members or that they're optional or semi-optional, be it as it may. Not everybody pledged in the first place, but those who did pledged $17 billion all in all. Not 1 cent of it has been relegated to its bank account, or if it has been relegated, it has not been moved to that particular bank account. It could have gone somewhere else. We will never know. we will likely never know. What is clear to me is that without financial contributions, none of the big plans for stabilization, reconstruction, and so forth can reasonably come to fruition, which means the Board of Peace is either going to have to fundraise from elsewhere, or is going to figure out a way how to do things for free, and through voluntary in-kind contributions from members or from other parties. Mladenov, the ex-UN official, who is now tasked with essentially being the face of the organization, the active face of the organization, is planning to is planning to assess the situation in Gaza. He is pushing the disarmament of Hamas, but Hamas has only gotten more entrenched over the past few months. There's been also efforts to circumvent Hamas by focusing on the areas under Israel's control by advancing educational and humanitarian initiatives with willing Palestinian doctors and other actors who are more favorable towards some sort of a de-radicalization effort. But again, without financing, there is not much progress to be made, or any progress that will be made on a voluntary basis could be quickly undone by Hamas the moment Israel leaves the area. And Israel cannot maintain its presence continuously. The government is going into elections right now. It's handling a critical situation in the north with Hezbollah's continued attacks, and there's also controversy over Iran and Trump. So Gaza, first of all, is nobody's priority at the moment, except on a very narrow security back end. We've seen Israel eliminate various Hamas figures in recent months. They have had an ongoing campaign of killing off or arresting anybody who's had anything to do with October 7th, which is a high number of officials in Hamas and operatives. But aside from that, this issue has been relegated to the back burner due to the more immediate regional security concerns. It has not been a major priority for anybody. This effort to reassess the situation is essentially probably as much a bit to get the pledges out of the members by showing continued interest and continued engagement, as there a serious effort to return the issue to the public attention, given that until the Iran situation is resolved and trade is renormalized, that's probably not going to be of much interest to anyone.
Absolutely. Lots of things happening in the world. And every 2 weeks, that's why we come to you and get a sense of what's all happening on the ground. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.